The author of that article, Daniel Drezner, joins us now. He is also a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School at Tufts University and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. All right, Daniel. So President Trump made such a big show of touting Rex Tillerson's abilities during the nomination process, constantly talking about how much of an asset he would be to the administration. So what happened?
I think what happened is that the president, like most presidents, probably discovered that he prefers running foreign policy out of the White House rather than delegating to the Secretary of State. And also, perhaps the other problem is that the Secretary of State, in his confirmation hearings, espoused views on the state of the world that were somewhat at odds with Donald Trump.
I want to ask you, you were in your article here, you were talking about that there are others at the White House who may have more proximity to Donald Trump. What was interesting to me in recent weeks, I thought that interview, the meeting that he had with the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, suddenly it seemed after he spoke to him, he had a different take on settlements, on two-state solution. So how does someone like Rex Tillerson manage to get closer proximity to the president when he's out in a building like the State Department and isn't as close to him as maybe the advisors who are inside the building?
This is a real challenge, obviously. One way that he can do this is to actually try to sort of routinize either bi-weekly or tri-weekly meetings with Trump so that he can make sure he's actually physically in the room with Trump and therefore express his views on a regular basis. The other thing that Tillerson can potentially do is if he can't meet with Trump individually, he can also play the outside game. He can be more visible in the press. He can be more visible with Congress. And in some ways, that's the really confusing part of this, because Rex Tillerson has been nowhere to be seen. He hasn't really made that many public statements outside of his original welcome address to State Department employees. And indeed, there are now reports surfacing that when the State Department issues its annual human rights report on Friday, traditionally the Secretary of State has been involved with that. Tillerson will not be involved with that on Friday. So he's losing both at the inside game and the outside game.
Daniel, you know what's interesting, though, you talk about how, so much in foreign policy is done behind the scenes. So not seeing Rex Tillerson in the forefront is not surprising. But the fact that so much of what the Trump administration does is in front of the cameras. You know, he is a showman. He enjoys that sporting event. How does someone like Tillerson, though, manage to craft foreign policy when there's just so many questions about where this administration is going on foreign policy?
I think the basic problem that Rex Tillerson has at this point is that his primary job seems to be cleaning up after Donald Trump when Trump has a bad phone call with a foreign leader or when he tweets something that's seen as obnoxious by most of the rest of the world. Eventually, there's going to be a point where he presumably wants to play a more constructive role to actually advance his own initiatives. Although even there, the problem is that the only political appointee who's been confirmed at the State Department is Rex Tillerson. He needs a staff. He needs senior-level officials. And there's no evidence to date yet that the Trump White House is actually going to put any of these names forward.
So, Daniel, in the circles you run in at the Fletcher School and also at the Brookings Institute, what are the biggest concerns about what's happening here at State, and what should the American people be concerned about, if anything?
How long is your program? Because I could really go on for like 2 hours about it.
We're 24 hours, Daniel.
In terms of what's going on. That's okay. That's good. I can filibuster the entire time. This will be great. I think the real concern at this point is that, to be fair, weirdly, the Trump White House has been remarkably lucky in that there hasn't really been a major foreign policy crisis that they've had to cope with. I think their genuine concern is twofold. First, that if a crisis hits, that the State Department is so badly undermanned that they won't be able to make the phone calls they need to make, and so on and so forth. I think the second larger issue is that in some ways the sort of goodwill that exists between the United States and most of its key allies and partners in the world, it's eroding. Think about it like capital equipment that depreciates slowly over time unless you continually invest in those relationships. Right now, there was a great piece by Julia Ioffe in The Atlantic talking about how the center of activity right now in the State Department is the cafeteria, because they have no official tasks to do because no one signed off on anything.
Wow. Daniel Drezner evoking an image of the State Department as a rusting tractor out there in the field. Thank you for that. I appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, Daniel.
Always happy to provide the metaphor. Thanks.